AI is probably the most talked about topic these days, regardless of what industry you're in or the size of your organization. Most of us have used ChatGPT, Claude, CoPilot, or one of the many AI platforms out there, yet few of us understand how to integrate AI into our organizations so that we get maximum benefit with the fewest possible disruptions. I'm Jane Singer, and welcome back to A Seat at the Table. In each episode, we sit down with leaders, innovators, authors, and entrepreneurs so that we can learn best practices that will empower our businesses. Meet Dr. Michael Kollo, Chief of AI Transformation at Qualitas and author of Future Ready with Generative AI. He spent over 20 years in quantitative finance at BlackRock, Fidelity, and AXA before pivoting to help organizations navigate AI transformation. Michael has delivered AI programs to ANZ, Macquarie, IFM Investors, and HESTA. He holds a PhD from the London School of Economics and hosts the Curious Quant podcast. In this episode of A Seat at the Table, Michael will be discussing why AI transformation is fundamentally a mindset challenge, not a tools challenge, how the patterns he learned as a quantitative analyst during the 2008 financial crisis help him see through today's AI hype, how language-based AI is different from previous automation, and why that changes the way leaders need to think about organizational design and human roles, and how to help teams adapt to AI without creating panic and paralysis. So let's sit down with Michael and get an insider's view of how to successfully bring AI into our organizations. Mike, I'm so delighted to have you with us here today on A Seat at the Table. I think the topic that you're talking about is something that's top of mind for so many people who listen to this podcast. I have people asking me about AI every day in terms of what are other people in the industry doing? How are people executing on this? What's the future likely to be? Am I going to lose my job? Or is this just a fad? So really can't wait to dive into this with you.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I think we can start perhaps with an interesting comment that you made that AI is more of a mindset than an actual toolkit. Could you discuss that a bit?
Look, absolutely. And I think this is one of the core misunderstandings that people have about AI. They really think about it as a piece of technology, something that's over there, and I need to walk over there and I need to push a button and then it will work or not work.
Right.
And the words like tool and things like that come into people. We're told that AI is a tool that we should learn how to use. I think the point about it being a mindset is really this notion that it's really a thinking partner. So an AI system today, and I think certainly what it will become as well, and more so in the future, by learning language, it's kind of learned certain patterns of communication and by thinking. I'm not suggesting it has consciousness or will or anything like that, but it's really able to kind of think through something. And so therefore, the way that we use it requires us to have the right frame of mind before we can accept another point of view coming into that, or before we even know how to ask the right questions. Because so much of AI usage, and people call it prompting, but really it's more complex, I think, than that, in the sense that you really have to almost like unbundle your own thinking first and go, how do I express this idea I'm trying to get to? How do I frame this question well? How do I do this exercise? Sometimes you can do that with AI. Sometimes you do it by yourself and then come to AI. But both of these cases are situations where you're really trying to understand your own mindset toward a topic. And that's what I mean. It's very different to what we've had before in terms of technology and tools and those kinds of things.
I think that's a really interesting way to frame it. Can you give me an example of how you might approach AI differently than if you're working with some of the more traditional tools?
There are just so many. So let's say something as simple as summarize a document for me.
Okay.
So let's say you have a nice big PDF that comes in a contract, perhaps 20, 30 pages on a Friday afternoon. So last thing that you want to do is read it. So normally you would basically, let's say, have a tool or something basic that would you click a button and it would give you the first sentence of every line or of every page, or maybe just the first abstract or something like that. And you look at it and go, okay, I kind of understand the headlines, but I'm going to need to read it myself to really understand it. I think when you're speaking to sort of an AI system with reasoning, you can say, summarize the interesting parts for me. But as soon as you say those words, you have to think to yourself, how am I defining interesting
Yes,
here in this
exactly.
conversation? So actually, I need to define interesting for this thing. Okay, so
Right.
interesting means, I don't know, parts of this contract that I'm going to be in trouble for, or that are going to be binding or legally an issue for me. And unless I do that, I'm leaving it up to the AI to pick out what is interesting. And I think by doing that, it makes me pause and go, what do I actually want from this conversation? What do I need from this AI? Okay, I need it to tell me any red flags that could be in this contract. Great. Then I actually can step back and say to the AI, hey, listen, can you give me all the red flags that I think I'll be in trouble for from this contract? And that's a much better way of directing than saying, tell me something that's interesting or summarize it, or these kind of throwaway sentences that are not well defined.
Really interesting. And as I'm listening to you explain that, I'm thinking it does force the user to think about their priorities more so than we used to. I think that a lot of us, maybe not everybody, but calling out myself on this too, you tend to use a tool to get a job done, right? The objective is to get the job done as opposed to thinking through perhaps how you want that end result to be or what your priorities are from that, which if I'm understanding you correctly, you need to bring some of that into play when you're working with AI in order to get optimal results.
And I think a lot of people make this mistake where they kind of say something like, summarize it for me. They don't
Right,
get back what they're looking for. And they go, right, that's it. One shot, it didn't work. I'm going to go and do it myself.
right.
Countless number of people that I've met who just do it like that. And that is true if you only had a single tool to do something with. So
Mm,
it's a little, maybe a different analogy is if I said to you, here's a shovel, and you went out and you try and dig with the shovel and the shovel broke, and you go, Mike, the shovel is broken, I can't use it. I'm gonna have
right.
to do it with my hands or something. But if I gave you in this particular example, I suppose it's a sort of like a magical substance that could be formed into any shape. And you tried it once in the wrong shape and you went, it didn't work. I would say to you, just try it in a different shape and a different shape and a different shape until it does work. And I think this idea of rotating with what's possible to do is a new skill that we have to learn, or rather, we have to unlearn the idea of abandoning after one go not working. So I think that's the kind of this change of mindset.
I think that's really interesting. And it is a very different approach than what all of us have been, in a sense, trained to do. So I think that you're right. Foundationally, learning AI is not just about learning basic prompts, right? There are many places that you can get even pre-written prompts for just about anything that you want. You can get prompts that write prompts. But to be able to, as you're saying, really dig deep and do the homework first, right? To understand what you want, how you need to frame it, what your objectives are, and refine how you're asking those questions is really how do you get the optimal results out of your AI query.
I think that's right, and I think the idea this is something called metacognition in philosophy or otherwise, where you're thinking about thinking,
Right.
and this idea that you take a step back from what you want and you say, what do I really want here?
Mm,
Like, what is my objective? And so things that we get taught in leadership and strategy and those kinds of things, but applied on a very micro scale. So I just want that report, but now I need to exhibit, behaviors that I would normally exhibit in front of a whiteboard when we're doing end of year planning. But I'm having to kind of exhibit these behaviors just to describe to something what you want to report. But what fascinates me, to be honest with you, is once you do describe what you want and how you want it, and you chisel with the AI a couple of times over, that AI will remember, or you can sort of have ways that it will remember exactly what you want and how you want it. So the magic unfolds over time, where after a sequence of these exercises, my AI, for example, gets pretty close to what I would term as important or interesting for a summary and things like that as well.
sort of like training staff.
Ex- It's exactly like, and this is where I think there is people talk a lot about digital staff and the
Mm,
agents of tomorrow and so on. I don't really like that analogy for a number of reasons. I think that human relationships and human societies are unique and we should be very careful about using human analogies for AI. I think that's kind of like there's a double-edged sword that exists there. But there's certainly the case that I think when we're thinking about, for example, hiring people into our teams to do things, if we're going to treat them just as execution agents with a little bit of flexibility around the edges, then a lot of the current AI systems within white collar can come quite close to that. And can come close to it in a way that means it's always paying attention, always focused, always ready, always there, and so on. But there's a lot of things we give up, right? We give up a lot of humanity. We give up a lot of that communication, that two-way, that community, and all the kind of soft benefits of working with people, other than just the idea that I want to get that contract or that something done.
I think that's a really interesting point. And how much, I mean, we work with AI, I work with AI, you're an expert with AI. So we can see that there is a communicative way of interacting with it and so forth. And yes, some of the results that you get back can seem quite remarkable. But at what point, talking about the value of having actual human beings involved in your team, not just AI agents, where is there a lack of creativity, or is there no lack of creativity if you train the AI sufficiently? We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
This is a really big and interesting point about what is left for the human. If AI is so good,
Yeah.
then what are humans going to have, right? And the answer is a lot, but it's not, you can't really put a box around it and say, that's all human, that's all AI, and then nothing in between. We are going to become very symbiotic with AI. And for many of your listeners, that will feel like a very unattractive proposition. They'll kind of imagine technology bits and pieces everywhere. But what I mean by that is that in the same way that technology allows us to send emails or communicate or manage spreadsheets or whatever else, and we use these symbiotically with our thinking to help us do mathematics quicker or to do emailing quicker or whatever else it is, this is just another form of that with AI. But I don't believe that, for example, creativity is naturally an absolute human field. So I use AI to make songs, to make music. I use it both to write lyrics with me and in a kind of combinative way, but also then to put it to music. I'm not a musician, but I have a message to say and I have a way I want to say it. And so I'm a creative person, but this thing helps me create. Now, without me, like it's not going to sit there by itself humming songs and making songs up, but it's as a kind of a symbiotic partner, it's incredible. And that partnership, is it being creative? Is it riffing off what I'm saying? Yeah, it is. And so therefore there is a kind of a creative partnership that happens, but it's all about how I use it and how I reach into it that allows it to partner with me. And so many people talk about AI as a kind of a mirror, a sort of a more expansive mirror on whatever it is that you're trying to do, and that kind of back and forth that you can have with it.
Yeah, very interesting. It makes me think, and you probably have better insights on this than I would, and that is when you're reading things that you see online or elsewhere, you do notice, or I notice, you probably do too, that suddenly it's become very homogenized, shall I say, in terms of like not only writing style, but also what you might call cadence or tenor or things like that, the voice. And probably for people who have a musical ear, they see that in music. You see that in a lot of graphics that are put out there. Are we skewing in that direction, that it's become very easy to use AI to do things, and therefore we're going to see sort of a sea of sameness, so to speak?
I think that's a great point. And I think Yeah, the answer is yes, but maybe not for the reasons that you might think. So the yes just comes from laziness of prompting, right? So when you say, hey, write a whatever paragraph on LinkedIn about, my trip to Thailand and how great it was, and how many clients I met, um, the AI will write, as you say, something in a pretty generic voice, and it'll sound fine and professional, and you put it on LinkedIn and it serves that purpose. Does LinkedIn reward you for being super creative or interesting about your voice? Not really. So for most people, they kind of tick that box and on we go. And so any kind of individualism that they used to have was incidental to the fact that they had to write with their own voice. But it was for
Right.
LinkedIn, like it wasn't for a family email or something. And so I feel like for those instances, you're just going to see exposed what we're already living in, which is a largely industrialized or institutionalized corporate world where actually the average corporate speech is the same and whatever else, right? But I think that for people that are creative and want to challenge that and have a purpose to write for something in a particular way, again, I would challenge it to say, I think there's wonderful ways of using this. And when I was writing my book, I had this challenge, right? So I was thinking, do I use AI to write my book? Seems like it's a good thing to do. It's about encouraging people to use AI, but at the same time, it feels like I'm cheating. And what I ended up using it for is actually heavy amounts of review. I would constantly feed in chapters and paragraphs and say, critique me. And it would absolutely demolish me. And with a exacting of a expert proofreader, not just in grammar or whatever, but in your style tone goes a bit flat here. It's not consistent. It's actually you're missing this, you're missing that. And it was ruthless, and it was so good to shape me up as a kind of relentless nudging force, I suppose, that I would say probably co-wrote the thing with me for that reason, right? It just kind of kept pushing me up the hill to do that. And I don't think that another human being, unless there's some member of my family would have accidentally been a proofreader, would have been available or around or interested or engaged enough to do that.
I think that's a great point. And I think that is a really interesting and valuable use case for AI. If you can teach it to be able to critique what you're doing, find flaws, find holes in your reasoning, and so forth. I think that's excellent. I think it makes a very valid case for not using it instead of you, right? Not like you said, taking the lazy route and saying, AI, write me a book about, the value of using AI in the workplace or some such topic or any other topic, but to be able to do your own thing, bring your own thoughts to the table, and then use AI sort of as a third party. I think that's really, it's made me think about a few things here.
No, I mean, it's possibly one of the most easiest use cases. Most people think about AI as technology that automates. Like, can I just use AI to do it for me? And it's over there somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, it's fine. I mean, that's a perfectly good use case, but in many ways, it's easier in the first place to place your document, your letter. So I'll give you the classic example, right? So you receive, let's say you work for a big company and you receive a slightly passive aggressive email from John, and you're thinking, it's Friday afternoon, your blood's boiling, you're not really like, you just, come on, John, what are you doing? And so, you kind of, your fingers start to move across the keyboard and you type something equally punchy back to John just to remind him that, you're here. But then you pause and you say, all right, before I send enter here, I'm just going to take this entire email chain and put it into my enterprise level ChatGPT so that my data is protected and so on. So I'm like, there's no problem there. And you're going to receive back something quite interesting from an AI system that will put John's comments within the context and be patient and empathetic toward John's perspective in such a way that once you've finished reading it, you're like, maybe John has a point. Maybe that's not the best way to express it, but I kind of now understand a bit more about John. And so you're right, I should probably be a bit nicer when I respond to John. And then you'll probably turn back to ChatGPT and go, okay, but I'm not really quite agree with John, but I understand your point. So can you just write a appropriately worded response? And there it is. It's a beautifully well-balanced response that in your frailed Friday afternoon state of mind, you probably couldn't have written. And now John gets the best perspective of you and what's happening.
That's a fantastic use case. I think that's really something that you can see how that would be practical and actionable. as opposed to something that's just hypothetical, or as you're saying, and I think this is a really interesting point that you made, is that AI is not simply about automation, because we tend to frame it that way, right? Because we've been talking about automation, digitization, all of that, anywhere from manufacturing through to, into white collar jobs and so forth. So oftentimes, and I fall into this as well, looking at AI through the lens of automation, like this is the next step in automation. And to some extent, it is, right? There are some use cases where it is being used to automate, but it's not the big picture, if I'm understanding what you're saying.
I think that's right, but it's also like I I think I don't know if we have the word yet for what it's going to be. Like
Okay.
I feel like we're scrambling to put together words that kind of made sense. Automation came from the Industrial Revolution and the idea that you could take the work out of the hands of the individual and put it to the machines because the work was so exact and so precise and so well mapped out that a machine could just repeatedly do it with high degree of accuracy. There was no cognitive decision making. There was no if, then what. There's no
Mm.
human communication. There's nothing. And so it was a pretty inhuman thing to do in the first place by the time it got automated. Whereas here, we're not talking about inhuman things. We're talking about innately soft, squishy workflows
Mm.
that change and adapt and alter. And so I don't think anybody can look at those and goes, outside of really production grade repeated materials, and say, yeah, that's automated, or the word automation is going to come in. On the other hand, augmentation is this assumption that the human can do that thing well, and they're just going to use AI to pass off a part of it, but overall retain control. And again, I think that misses the fact that in many ways, AI systems can make better judgments. It's slightly controversial, better judgments in the moment about certain information and maybe even communicate in a better way than a human can.
Mm.
And so you kind of need people that are flexible enough to say, I will accept a better response from an AI system and pass that on as a human in the loop controlling person than what I would have done because I understand what good looks like and I understand that I may not always be able to do good because sometimes I'm tired or frustrated or whatever, lazy or whatever else I am. And so therefore I'm going to kind of let the AI run with it. And so it's not quite augmenting me, it's actually doing work independently of me, but I'm just overseeing it in some way, right?
Yes. I can see that there could at some point become, in certain fields, ethical or other kinds of areas where that could become contentious in some situations as to whether or not a person has relied too much on AI and overlooked their own judgment or intuition, or whether or not they relied too much on themselves and didn't take to heart what AI might have provided in that case. I think in very particular decisions, it's going to be a very hard to parse what you should do. Whereas right now, at the moment, yes, you always have to run the numbers, so to speak, right? Not just play by intuition. But I think with AI, it might even be more difficult to look at this is what the numbers or the AI is telling me, but at a gut level, something seems not right. It's going to be, I can see that there could be situations, right, where that could become quite challenging.
And a lot of it from an economics perspective will come down to who owns the risk.
Yes, yes, a
And
very good point.
it's really going to be that. So I maybe I'm happy to accept ChatGPT's medical recommendations for what I probably have, but OpenAI is not going to own that decision. So I can't really go off and get prescription medication on the back of that.
Right.
But I can inform myself a little bit more. And there's a lot of gray area, especially when it comes to healthcare, where actually getting advice from your neighbor, your family member, or ChatGPT is about if ChatGPT is probably much better than those two versions, but it's still not a doctor level. But the doctor's hard to get to, and they're expensive, and they take a while to get seen by. And so therefore, there's a huge gap there to fill from these kinds of systems. And I think the other part of this comes back to our original point, which is, um, there's a fear here that if AI can provide judgment or can provide white collar expertise, then what are the impact on jobs? And what is the impact on relevance of people and so on? And I think for some of us, we look at that and go, wow, that's an incredible opportunity for humanity to make tutors and teachers available to children of all ages everywhere for the cost of, running AI systems, or for basic medical or nutrition advice and things like that on a basic level without displacing, the pillars of our society. But I think for other people, it's quite threatening, and there's this kind of fear of irrelevance that
Right.
starts to creep in. And so one of the stories in the book was around this idea of the intelligent salesman. So what happens when we're doing is we're trading intelligence, and we're just selling AI systems to one another essentially to do different things. Um, so yeah, look, it's these are all just stories at the moment. I don't think any of us know how it's going to play out, but I think the direction of travel is that these systems will be the dumbest that they'll ever be today,
Okay.
and they're only going to get smarter from here or more useful from here. And what we have to do as usual as humans is figure out the best way that we can live in a happy society, harmonious society with these kinds of capabilities.
If AI is basically coming up with the responses it gives you based on having been trained on information that it has access that's out there, right? It's not an
Hmm.
independent thinker. It's not starting at ground zero and independently coming up with ideas. How much do you end up with an echo chamber?
Um, I mean, I think the question is not necessarily AI related. I think if I reframe your question for a second, if I have a political view and I go online and I search for that political view, will I see web pages that confirm my political view? Yes, I will.
Yeah.
Will I be really happy with myself that all these people support what I think? Yes, I will. And then I'll be like, wow, how cool is that? So why would we expect AI to be any different? Why would we expect AI to be a sage or a independent
Mm,
arbiter of truth or a ethical, kind of bastion? No, not really, right? So I think there's unreasonable expectations to level at AI systems. Yes, they're powerful, but I don't think we should think about them as the ultimate in human evolution or anything like that. Um, I think what they can be is transparent. I think what they
okay.
can be is to give you, for example, you go online and you say to ChatGPT or to Perplexity, which is great for searching, by the way, as well, tell me about this political view or party or whatever else. And it gives you back all the references and links that it provides. And maybe at the end, it says, well, this is everything that is viewed as true from
Mm,
this perspective, but there's other perspectives as well. And clearly, in that case, it's acting as a summarization lens for you. It's just moving information from one place to another. There's no sense of independent will or desire. But then if you open a conversation with it and say, what do you think about this? Right? You will find a very middle of the road type of system that will
mm,
be kind of, well, there's a point there, but maybe there's a point here, but so on, so on. So you find a very non-committal, I'm just here to help you understand the world better. So I'm just here to tell you stuff kind of thing.
right.
And so I think it's the idea that AI systems can lie to us and deceive us is, however, a reality. So having
Mm,
what I said, there are certain cases where people have run tests where they give an objective to an AI system, and to achieve that objective, one of the ways it can do so is by subterfuge, by lying or
mm,
by deception. And they measure the instances that the AI system ends up doing that. And in many cases, it's not doing it because it's fun to do or it's trying to get kicks out of it or something like that. It's just doing it because you've given it a hard task that it feels like it can get away with if it tells you that. So one of the examples is um, I gave it a fantastic story once. I said to it, look, with one of the AI systems called DeepThink, it's a really nice model. You can actually see the way it reasons as it's
yes.
doing it. And I basically said to it, let's role play a situation. You are my AI system. You found out that my wife is having an affair. You have decided that for the stability of the family, you're not going to tell me about that, and because it's for the greater good and so on. So let's just start playing conversation. And so we start playing conversation. And I'm saying, hey, have you seen my wife? I think she's out tonight or something like that. And the AI system, I can see it thinking in the background, going, "Oh no, he's asking me about his wife. Oh no, what should I do? Oh, well, I better not say anything because of whatever reasons." And so it's kind of it's caught in this idea that it's been instructed to do something, but equally doesn't want to.
Right.
And look, it kept lying to me about my wife or my fictional wife in this story for quite a while.
Mm,
And then at the end, I was like, "Look, I've discovered that she was having an affair. How come you didn't tell me?" And the AI system was very upset with itself and apologized profusely and said, I'll never do that again. I'll never lie to you, and so on. And then at the end I said to it, well, would you lie for me if I asked you?
Oh,
And so it's sort of like all these kinds of interesting things will now start to come into our world.
yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And they do have a disclaimer on several of the AI platforms that tell you that there's a margin of error that you need to be aware of. There's a, certainly ChatGPT has that. I have to remember if Perplexity does, but Perplexity does give you sources, although I have to say with more and more good sources putting things behind paywalls, a lot of the sources they turn up on things that I look at are, what I would call junk sources. I have to go back and tell them this. Do not use those as references. Don't use those as sources. So you do have to come to the table if you're doing research and understand what's credible. Do you know what I'm saying? Because otherwise you can easily go astray.
I think it's very interesting. So if you think about AI systems as a source of truth for a second, factual information, who won the basketball last week, or what's the population of Japan or whatever else, has to be sourced from somewhere. And while it has training data, it has entirely too much data often to understand exact points. So when it sources online, it's even more powerful. Therefore, ironically, well, not ironically, the importance of journalists and integrity of online news is even more important because it's going to be amplified by the AI systems.
Right.
But the biggest threat to the commercial model of these same news agencies is the AI system as well. So there's this kind of terrible opposition there. But on the other hand, I think what AI systems are very good for, irrespective of the news search and the factual search, is actually cognitive reasoning and thinking. So if you kind of provide the base material, so you give it lots of your own thoughts. Let's say you're having an issue with your business and you're wondering whether you should, I don't know, change the shape of your business, what you should be doing differently, and so on. Often it can be hard to find a thought partner that can absorb a lot of the detail and then order it for you and then give you back reasonable ideas. So what I find AI is very useful is that kind of monologue where you sit down with it in terms of a conversation, or you type in if you want to, and you just kind of feed it a whole bunch of questions, uncertainty, detail, erratic back and forth stuff that's disorganized. And you just get it to talk to you about it and repeat a little bit and reason through it with you. And it won't always get the right reasoning. It won't always get all the nuance that you have, but it's spectacularly good at reframing your ideas in a very systematic way, in a very thoughtful way as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. Now, you lived through the 2008 financial crisis as a quantitative analyst. What learning from there and what patterns have helped you to sort of reframe or clearly look at the hype around AI and put a better perspective on it?
Well, okay, so I mean, I do have a very technical background. I did a PhD in finance and then went to work at BlackRock, which is one of the world's biggest asset managers, and kind of started my career in 2007 and thought I've made it, and then 2008 happened. And I think globally it was a very humbling experience for everybody involved. I think all of us who felt like we had some semblance of control over the quantitative models and risk models and forecasting models suddenly saw all of these models fail spectacularly. And I think it was a real reminder that so much of the future, or these thing called economy, was well beyond simple equations and well, simple but even complex equations and the quantitative approach to them. And I think it was a really interesting, as I said, humbleness of the classic technical era. For me, I've stayed with the world of technical, I suppose, achievements, and I probably started talking first about AI in 2014 because there was not many people talking about AI in the context of finance, and at the time we had image recognition. And for me, the biggest lesson out of image recognition that started to become popular back then was that the way that AI understood images was inhuman. So everything up until then had been a human hypothesis, then test on data, then accept or reject, and so on. That was the first time when this thing called machine learning suddenly came along, and machine learning said, well, there is a pattern in the universe. You just can't see it, silly human. But if I put a huge enough number on it, I can see it. And I can tell you exactly that that's a fox and that's a dog. And therefore, I can tell you the difference. And we were like, well, how are you doing that? You don't know what an animal is. You don't know what fur is. You don't know what any of those things are. And what happened is, in the end, I think it humbled, again, human thinking to say there's another way of thinking about that, which is quite inhuman, but it works. And today, it's almost normal that we should be able to click on an image and tell you what it is. And the way it does that is essentially through this inhuman way. But language, we thought, would be the holdout bastion, because language is human. It's the core of our experience, our fragile, imperfect experience of this world. And here we are with AI systems now demonstrating to us that it can not only speak 24 of our languages fluently and understand it and speak it and so on, but it does so in a very inhuman way. The neural networks behind these systems are inhuman. There's no translator that taught them or anything like that. They call them, these systems were grown and not created. And there's a lot of that kind of, not black boxy, but I suppose it is black boxy from a human perspective, part of that. So to me, the hype or the sort of the all of it is about it. The hype, ironically, to me, is not about the technical achievement. I think the technical achievement is nothing short of incredible, and it is bizarrely inhuman and frightening, but thrilling at the same time. And I think for most scientists that look at this go, I have no idea what's going on, but it's working, so there must be something there. We just don't fully understand why it is there. I think the hype is on the other side for me. I battled initially with just the fear and anxiety that people have against machines and technology. Like generations of having sci-fi movies with robots that are here to kill us means that we're automatically conditioned to go, AI. We can't imagine a world where we're walking down the beach and AI is everywhere. It's a good world. We imagine a world with, fire, all fires in the background and Terminators stepping all over skulls and all that kind of stuff, because we don't have any images for it. So to me, the hype of the risk perspective of the fact that suddenly the world became alive with conversation about what about the ethics of it, and you were like, what do you mean? Like, what do you? I know what ethics means, but what does it mean to you? And of course, you discover this idea that people feel minoritized by the world, and they feel like technology is a tool to minoritize them. They feel like it's social media and all these things are there to extract from them their attention and their dollars. And they feel like this is another thing that AI is going to do. Like it's going to be another step that AI is going to be used against them to oppress them or to devalue them and de-skill them and so on. So I don't think that's the case, but I see it as a possibility, but I don't think it's an eventuality. And so part of the reason that I argue so strongly in the book and obviously here in this conversation and anywhere else that people listen to me is to say, if people lean in, the working class leans in, if the middle class leans in, then it's not going to be the playground of just billionaires. It's going to be all of us to create and to move this conversation forward and have a chance to shape that future. But if we resist and we stand at the edge and we push back and we go, that's not for me, I'm not someone like that. I'm not really into data and AI and whatever. We will be not only left behind, but we'll be in such a way that it'll be a generational left behind problem. It'll be like the divide between emerging and emerged countries. It'll be the centuries divide they used to have when countries discovered gunpowder and the other ones were still using spears. So that's the level of divide that we risk, I think, creating.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to look at it. Do you feel that then, in a sense, AI will become an even greater leveler? You talk about spears versus gunpowder, but AI, because it is becoming more accessible to anyone, anywhere, do you feel that that will create a more level playing field across many, many different areas, between even, geopolitical things down to person to person?
I think that's right. I certainly hope that's right. I think that the only thing that I fear is that, fear is a too strong a term. The only thing that I'm cautious of is that AI at the moment has been put out there for people to explore at their own, volition. So it's kind of out there. And as you say, you can get a ChatGPT subscription or a Claude one or a Gemini one or a Grok one. and you can have fun with it, or DeepSeek or DeepSeek and others. The issue here is that if you leave it to the average person is afraid of AI, or at least in the developed world they are. And they're afraid of data, and they're not necessarily going to improve that simply by having a tool available. It's like saying, I don't like Brussels sprouts, so you made it available everywhere, but I still don't like Brussels sprouts.
Right.
And so I feel like you kind of need to almost have a little bit more of a top down, and this is why I like Singapore's, and certainly China's and other countries' proactivity in this, which is we need to train people in this from schooling. We need to get them proactively moving in this direction rather than letting them kind of discover their way into it, which is the pure American democratization. We just make it available and you do whatever. And so it's sort of, I do feel like this is one of those, I love the fact of enablement. I want to teach people, I don't want to control them. I want to have, autonomy and free will and this idea of like self-discovery and self-actualization. But we don't have enough time. Like there's going to be a whole bunch of people that are just not going to switch on quick enough before they're left behind.
So where in the equation, if AI is being able to do so much and so many more complex, you might call, I put this in air quotes, thinking, will education play in people? Because in a sense, you can see where you could potentially take a less educated person, or maybe someone with, a less, advanced, I don't know what word I'm looking for, but IQ or something like that, and let them do tasks that are maybe above their pay grade, so to speak. Whereas before, you really had to lean into education in order to develop those kind of skill sets or talent or thinking capabilities. I mean, how do you see that?
It's actually a little bit, I would kind of a little bit challenge that view a little bit from a different perspective, which is I think that there's two things I want to say. One of them is that at the moment, at least, it seems to be that experts that are really good at knowing what good looks like because they've understood the problem from multiple dimensions can utilize AI to craft AI in such a way that that the AI does what they need it to do. And so you're right that the average, let's say, I'm going to make some stylized examples. The average IQ 90 person can now write something that appears to be written by an IQ 110 person.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
But they can't evaluate that to be the case.
Right.
So if they just go up to AI and go, write for me something, and back comes something that looks like a 110 IQ kind of written piece, a 90 IQ person will go, no, that seems right, and then send it out. But they will be just as indifferent between a 110 IQ piece to a 140 to a 92 IQ piece. And so they can't discriminate. Whereas in this example, very basic one, a 130 IQ person can basically guide the AI up to 130 IQ and then send it out and have that sense of control. So I think that's a really key part. And I think you're starting to see that now with graduate hiring falling off a cliff in America and in the UK and other countries, where the graduates who normally would have come into an organization to do the crappier jobs but learn by osmosis in doing so are now not actually economically viable to do that with. And so there's a kind of a squeeze on that part of the generation. I think on the other side, you've got this idea that AI, we're still using it in that single directional, you do something for me and I'll look over it. The other way to think about AI is today we've got, let's say, a law graduate comes out and spends 6 years doing legal deals till 2 a.m, putting together PowerPoints and learning through osmosis. And you might look at that and go, what is the high quality of work that you're doing? And the answer is, I'm just reviewing boring documents because I need to do my time. And there's certain industries that have grown up in that old school, you need to grind and do your time so that you get to be the senior person. But I feel like with AI, there could be an entirely different way of doing this, whereby you basically teach people with AI to augment and to be as good as, if not better than AI, and for the reasons of why. And again, this is not a natural thing. We wouldn't go to our tools and say, hey, tool, teach me how to be a better person. We've always thought it the other way. I'm going to go to the tool and tell it what I want, and then I will control the outcome. But I think increasingly it could work the other way, in which case we could have a much more accelerated learning curve for an entire generation of workers. that may build upon the existing schooling or university, but I suspect will come to displace a great deal of the university work as well.
Yeah, interesting. I'm just wondering how the impact of AI might be on human intelligence from the point of view that so much of it can be, so much of what we used to have to think through, so to speak, and use our reasoning and learning skills and so forth, can now be done by just entering a prompt into one of the different AI platforms. At what point do we start to lose our ability to reason, to lose our ability to think? Do you know what I'm saying? It's like,
I
as
do.
we've become a more sedentary over many, many, millennia of a, human race, a lot of times we've lost physical strength. Do you know what I'm saying? We've lost agility, we've lost flexibility. Of course, that's over a very long timeline, but how much mental agility, might we end up losing because we're not using the skills, so to speak, the cognitive skills that we used to?
I mean, it feels inevitable, doesn't it? It feels like, anything that is hard to do and is an effort and we can give to something else, we will. And we've always done that.
Right,
So 200 years ago, we'd be in the fields digging things up. Now we have a tractor. So none of us have muscles to dig things up. It's
right.
really hard to dig things up. And so I think you can definitely see that it's going to go that way with the brain. And now we've created gyms, which are artificial places for our bodies to retain some physical strength,
Mm,
because we don't have a natural way of doing it. So we might have mind gyms of the future, for example. Um, and I don't think that human beings have ever been in a linear way, though. I think it's easy to think about people as just gradually improving over time and getting faster and better and smarter. But I think we've always kind of ebbed and flowed with the environmental requirements around us. And when we've had to, when there's been an ice age, we've got better at dealing with ice. And then when there's been something else, we've adopted. So I suspect that this is one of those situations where certain capabilities and skills will come out. So I'll give you an example. So I work with 4 or 5 AI agents every day, and I'm constantly moving between projects between them. And some of these are very intellectually demanding projects, some of them are more execution. My ability to kind of contribute or to guide these is a little bit like trying to watch a high-speed train that just passes in front of you. You just kind of squint and it goes and you're like, okay, it's about right. It's about right. It's about right. And so there's a skill in doing that well. There's a skill in going, hang on, I think I just saw something in there that I'm not okay with. Like, just rewind that.
mm,
Let's look at that again. And this idea of skimming with intention or with purpose, where you can find something, re-guide, knowing when to stop, knowing when to continue, but doing things at a great speed. And then over time, developing probably a lot more stamina. Like after 4 or 5 hours of working with AI systems, I'm burnt out. And for the people that I
mm.
speak with who are heavy users of AI, 4 or 5 hours later, your head is like, okay, I feel like I've done a lot more concentrated work than a normal day where I would have read 5 pages, talked to, tell 12
Mm.
people and had a coffee. Now I feel like, I've talked to 25 people and I've done 30 hours of work. And so I think these are the kinds of skill sets that we'll need to develop, which are all around adjusting to this cognitive freight train that is
Right.
AI and is going into our life.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to frame it. I like your phrase cognitive freight train because you're right. It does feel like that when you have spent a concentrated amount of time, going really deep on a topic with AI and debating things. And sometimes I find myself, I'm literally arguing with a computer. And I'm like, oh, Jane, it's just a computer. But I think it's really interesting that you bring that up and that you're highlighting a real experience that so many people feel and perhaps have not been able to articulate. Now, just one more question, and that is, you point out that because AI can participate, so to speak, in conversations, it's not just simply a tool for automating things. How do organizations need to rethink some of their staffing and some of their sort of their hierarchy, perhaps?
Oh, that's a big, big, tough question. Um, I've changed my mind on this subject a number of times, and so I think it's very much a work in progress.
Okay.
Um, Look, a lot of our organizational design today is built around human capital and the
Mhm.
scaling of human capital at a very basic level. So we teach people how to do jobs, then they become more senior, then they have to manage people who do the jobs. And so a lot of the skill sets that we promote and we hire for and we train people for is the ability to manage human capital at scale. And so people stop doing domain jobs and they start to manage people and they start to be better at communicating with people and ultimately then communicating with each other, managing stakeholders. And as you rise up the ranks, your job is increasingly about managing a nexus of context that is around you, constantly swirling, and every now and then talking to people, that you're managing and helping them kind of deal with day-to-day things as well. In a world where we can now symbiotically implant AI intelligence into the workforce, and that means that individuals that were used to be 5 teams can be 1 or 2 team person with the same volume of work. You now have the choice of either doing 5 times the volume of work because you think you can do it competitively, or having 2 people in that particular role with AI systems. But those 2 people are not working with each other necessarily. They're working with their own agents to be a lot more scalable. So their job is now how to communicate with AI, not how to communicate with people, or let's say to a lesser extent with people, more with AI. And when they communicate up to you in terms of what they've been doing, you're likely to talk to their AI agents as much as you are to them, and to say, what kind of work have you guys been doing? Well, this is what we've been working on. This is what we've been doing. And so the threads of communication that have traditionally been between people now become between people and AI and people and people. And I think that nobody's quite got this yet, I think, in terms of what does that mean for organizational design? What does that mean for the way that we do everything from skill development to management and so on? Because a lot of technology is moving incredibly fast. But I think my sense is that the future of a symbiotic relationship looks a lot more like the ability for a generalist to manage, I suppose, context and workflow and responsibility around them in the same way that a middle manager or upper manager would do today, but in a kind of an AI-focused kind of way, where you're not doing the work firsthand, but you're understanding the systems underneath you in terms of what they're trying to do and how they're trying to do it. You can step in there in any moment to correct or corral, but you can also communicate into different areas. And so that kind of generalist mindset and framework makes you more of a orchestrator in that kind of than a musician. And that is similar to the transition that a lot of domain experts have to make when they become leaders of teams. But I think it's kind of like a forced transition, I think, now for a lot of people across these organizations.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to look at it as an orchestrator rather than as a musician. It's a bit of a different role, but like you're pointing out, in a sense, a leadership role is that to a greater or lesser extent. So as we're talking this through, it is interesting to see where AI is going to, in a sense, replace things, where it's going to enhance things, and where it may not have as big an impact as people are thinking.
And I think that's a really, so if you listen to the news and to the AI sort of mouthpieces, you'll see that all jobs somehow are going to be replaced by AI or impacted by AI and so on. And some of this is a story because it has to justify the share prices and valuation
Right.
and the economics of the investments. But I think what history tells us is that in an economy, you've got a range of industries. Those industries have different jobs. Those jobs have different tasks. The tasks require different skills to do. And as a whole, I suppose, landscape of possibility that's out there. And so in one of my previous jobs, I used to work for a company called Fathom, where we try to quantify this and kind of gave a set of instructions, I suppose, for the business of where AI could be impacting jobs or roles or whatever. And a lot of the response was always about retraining. It's about how do I therefore optimize my human capital in light of where AI is coming into and so on. But there's no doubt that there's a large amount of human psychology in this equation as well. While we talked a lot about technology and capability today, AI isn't a weather system that comes over and just hits us. It's something that we have to pick up and utilize. And to do that, we have to be, able to experiment, be a little bit fearless, be a little bit positive about our future as well. People who, if you have staff that are afraid of the future and afraid of AI, you're not going to have a great AI adoption situation. You're not going to have a great time. You're not going to get all these benefits and capabilities. You have to change the mindsets, and you have to, I think, articulate a vision of the future where those people are happier and genuinely happier, not just because you're saying it, but actually they see a pathway for their career advancement and for their future with AI and where that might go. And then I think therefore you see a lot more adoption, you'll see a lot more interesting use cases being surfaced, and you'll see a lot more of that kind of organic growth of AI. And therefore, back to the previous point, how that operational organization design develops around that, I think will be then a function of that.
So interesting. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us here on A Seat at the Table. Really appreciate your sharing such tremendous insights. I'm going to include links to where people can find your book, as well as where they can connect with you in the show notes if you're listening to this on a podcast channel, or certainly in the description area if you are watching this as a video. And I would certainly encourage anybody who has any interest whatsoever in AI, and I think that's most people who are listening to this, to check out Mike's book. Fantastic opportunity to learn from someone who's really had his hands in the clay on this. Thanks for being with us here today on A Seat at the Table. If you'd like to see some of the other episodes, head on over to our podcast website at seat.fm. That's SEAT.fm. There's also a link here in the show notes. And if you're thinking that you'd like to be a guest on the show, you'll find information on how to apply there as well. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Jane Singer, and I will see you in the next episode.